Dissing Jeff Nippard when you know he comes to the same gym is the most alpha ever. Well, the most alpha would be saying Jeff Nippard in the video.
Sam looks 1,000% better than this person does. He's standing here with his shirt off, posing, looking like a pretty big monster for a 21-year-old kid. You're a grown adult who is tiny and has no physique to speak of, saying his hat on how strong he is for his size.
Jeff Nippard's the only one that's really upset with me.
Jeff Nippard is the nerd of fitness YouTube, and over the last 3 or 4 years, he's been preaching to train your muscles in a stretched position to optimize muscle growth. But a couple of weeks ago, he published this video talking about his latest study, which compared training at a full range of motion versus only training at the stretched part of a lift. And he got a lot of positive and negative feedback because of that. Now, the study itself found that lifting weights with a full range of motion had the same effect on muscle growth as performing the part where the muscles are the most stretched, also known as lengthened partials. But what makes it interesting is that this was the first ever study done to ever actually test this with trained lifters, while many studies in the past have used beginners. And the theory was that training with lengthened partials would cause superior results, but only in beginners, whereas those who had been training for a few years would have to rely on different strategies. But in the last few years, Jeff Nippard has received a lot of negative comments for claiming that lengthened partials is in a lot of ways better if you want to optimize muscle growth. And a lot of his content revolves around how you can optimize your own training based on the scientific literature we have available. And that has ruffled a lot of feathers, where there's now a massive breach in the fitness community where science-based lifters are being targeted for not training correctly, overcomplicating simple concepts, and doing everything to seem smart just by citing a study for every given training strategy. And Jeff Nippard sits right in the middle of this whole debate with his massive YouTube channel sitting at close to 6 million subscribers. But why do people really hate Jeff? And is he even in the right regarding his thoughts, his findings, and his motivation for training? Now, first, I have to mention that I personally like Jeff. I also base my knowledge on the most scientific literature. In 2023, I finished a master's in exercise physiology, and I've read hundreds of studies relating to general physiology, biomechanics, and how to optimize training for athletes as well as the general population. In other words, you'll probably think I'm biased, but I'm gonna do my absolute best to try to take both sides of the discussion into consideration. But let's start with this newest study of his. Jeff gathered up a team of incredibly smart people, physiologists, scientists, and coaches to monitor, test, and train his study participants, with the goal of seeing whether training at full range of motion or doing lengthened partials would cause better results. And as I mentioned, the participants themselves were very advanced, having trained for about 5 years on average, and they standardized the test and training incredibly well. For one, everyone trained in the same location with the same equipment, and everyone took each set to muscular failure, which is when you couldn't have physically done another rep. And this is also what a lot of science-based lifters get thrown at them, that they don't train hard.
I've stated for years that Jeff Nippard does not train hard enough.
Which is pretty dumb considering the overall scientific consensus is that training hard, either to failure or very close to failure, generally builds more muscle. The study also used ultrasound to test whether or not they gained any muscle mass, which is a pretty solid and reliable way to assess it. Everyone in the study trained one side of their body with lengthened partials and the other side with a full range of motion, with the end result being that after 8 weeks, both sides saw similar muscle growth. And with most studies on beginner lifters showing that lengthened partials are either superior or the same to full range of motion, it's safe to assume that lengthened partials should be a part of your training if you want to optimize muscle growth. And again, that is not accounting for other goals like maximizing muscle strength for specific movements, plyometric training, endurance training, but solely with the goal of gaining muscle. Of course, there will be a lot of people pushing the idea that Jeff is still wrong about this principle, but at least he's trying to prove his point by actually going out there and doing the research. But the claim about lengthened partials causing more muscle growth is just the tip of the iceberg for why people dislike Jeff, as a lot of the pushback he gets often comes from the crowd who believes that lifting shouldn't be so complicated. These critics argue that people have been getting jacked for decades now by simply lifting heavy, training hard, and eating right, without needing to optimize every tiny variable. And they often make the claim that Jeff Nippard's physique is, as the broccoli hair kids would say, hella mid. And in a way, they have a point. Classic bodybuilding and strength training training methods have produced countless champions long before modern scientific research even came into play. But here's where Jeff Nippard's approach challenges that old school mentality, because he's not saying that those methods don't work. In fact, he says that about 90% of the work is just showing up and training adequately hard. What Jeff argues is that if you're looking to squeeze out every possible ounce of progress in your training, it is worth paying attention to the nuances, like training in the stretch position, optimizing exercise selection, and modulating training variables more than just lifting a weight until you can't anymore. And that's really where the conflict arises. Some people view Jeff's meticulous approach as overkill, making training feel like a science experiment rather than something instinctual and simple. And many argue that looking to optimize everything takes the fun out of training, because now you're not thinking about just going there to lift heavy, but now you think that you could always be doing something a little bit better and should always strive for that extra 0.01% of gains. To be fair, lifting science can sometimes be very dry. It can be complicated and unnecessary for the average lifter who just wants to look good and feel strong. People don't always have the patience to dig through PubMed studies to decide whether or not 3 sets of 8 or 5 sets of 12 on squats, and what angle your hips should be if you want to maximize tension on your quads or hammies. And this is where Jeffrey Nipples can rub people the wrong way, because his content, while very informative, sometimes makes it feel like if you're not following the latest research to the letter, you're wasting your time in the gym. There's also the whole paralysis by analysis phenomenon, and since fitness is already pretty intimidating for a lot of people just starting out, when every detail is scrutinized, whether it's rep ranges, range of motion, or how long you should rest between sets, it can make things feel a bit overwhelming. Which means people often end up just second guessing themselves instead of going to the gym and just putting in the work. But another reason why Jeff Nippard gets a lot of heat is the sheer volume of scientific jargon he includes in his videos. And while this appeals to a certain audience, myself included, it alienates others. Not everyone wants to hear about muscle protein synthesis, motor pathways, or just long complicated studies when they're just looking for solid workout advice. It's of course a balancing act, and Jeff often leans heavily into the science, making it much harder for maybe casual lifters to relate to his content. Although I'd argue based on the current size of his audience, he is presenting tough to filter information much better than most people in the industry. But here's the thing. Jeff's content is aimed at people who want to optimize their training. He's not trying to convince the world to ditch what's been already working for decades. Instead, he is offering a method and approach that is backed by the latest science for those who are interested in refining their training methods. Sure, it's not for everyone, and his approach will inevitably ruffle some feathers. But if you're somebody who wants to get the absolute most of every workout, why would you not pay more attention to the details? And in that sense, Jeff is just giving out tools for people to work with. Whether you use them or not is gonna be up to you. So is Jeff Nippard really guilty of overcomplicating fitness? Maybe. But he is also helping people train smarter and to see better results through science. Because at the end of the day, whether or not you love or hate him probably comes down to how much you care about maximizing your gains versus just putting in the work. Unless you're Coach Greg, then you probably just dislike him. Let me know what you guys think down below, whether or not you think science-based lifting is just a bunch of jargon, or if you think it actually has its use. And whether or not you think Jeff Nippard is overcomplicating stuff, or if he's actually putting out good information, trying to do his best to showcase the literature that we have. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every piece of support that I can get, and seeing you leave a comment and a like means a lot more than I can comfortably express. And hey, if you want custom meal plans and training plans tailored to your individual goals and lifestyle, consider checking out my website where I coach people on a one-to-one basis, and you can easily sign up today with just a few clicks. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.